Welcome to Literature Live, Brightness of Brook. This is a series in which we bring new books and writers to our audience. And the real reason for this is that we're all enveloped by this gloom caused by the virus. And we want to brighten our lives with new books that come out, which have been coming out all over the country. And today we've got a famous and award-winning Malayalam writer, Unni R, who's known mainly for his short stories, but he's written his first novel, and it's called The Cock Is The Culprit. It's been translated by J. Devika, who's a JNU alumnus and who's been translating a lot of Malayalam books into English. We'll have a conversation with Unni and Shashi Tharoor, who I don't think needs an introduction. Shashi, we will be talking to you about your own books in a couple of weeks, I imagine. But today we are talking of Unni's book. And to talk to both of them, we have Sabin Iqbal, the festival director of the Mathrubhumi Literary Festival, a wonderful festival to which I've been invited a couple of times, and in which Shashi Tharoor is always the star. So over to the three of you. Sabin, take over.
Thank you, Anil. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. And I think it's time to hold up the book. The Cock Is The Culprit. Dr. Tharoor, if you... Yes. There we go. This is Cock Is The Culprit. It's been formally launched now. It's a wonderful production. Glad to see that. So let me welcome Dr. Tharoor and Unni to this conversation around Unni's new novel, his first novel, in fact. Let me start by asking Dr. Tharoor about, I presume you've read the book and, you mentioned it's being a satire. So let me ask, how important is political satire in a democracy, especially in a democracy that a country like India is going through right now?
I think it's indispensable. So, first of all, let me say my congratulations to Unni on having written a splendid book. It's really a triumph of satire, because what he's done is he's taken a seemingly simple story that works at so many levels and is full of so many resonances that go beyond the surface details of the story itself. And I think that's been a terrific art. It's also a very short book, which I hope in today's era of minimal attention spans is actually going to be therefore more widely read. He is, as you mentioned already, a very accomplished short story writer. And therefore, he is a master of the very short form. But this is sort of what one used to call a novella length. The English translation is about 100 pages. And it is a breeze to read, but at the same time, it packs an enormous amount of metaphorical weight. The other thing about the book, which is worth mentioning, though she's not with us, is that the translator, Devika, who translated Unni's short stories recently, has done a very good job. So it's a very accessible story. One of the great problems with Indian translation from Indian languages has historically been the difficulty of communicating cultural specificities. And as a result, either too many explanations are provided or too many footnotes or other glosses are added, and readers get weighed down by the explanations rather than by the narrative. That is not there with this translation of the book. It flows very smoothly, and you can easily figure out everything that goes on. In fact, I have to say I was very struck by the depth of the book, because it ends. The penultimate chapter has a piece of news happening to two characters in the book who I thought I had not come across earlier. So I reread earlier portions and realized there had actually been very subtle indications by the author of what was to come. in a couple of scenes. I won't spoil the thing for the reader, but it's a very artfully constructed book. Now, you asked about the general thing of satire. You know, I did write a couple of satirical novels myself, very different style, of course, the great Indian novel, and then show business. And I thought that because we didn't have much of a literary tradition in the Indo-English novel of writing satire, that I would be perhaps blazing a path. Now, since then, many different kinds of satirical works have emerged. Unni's is written in Malayalam to begin with, and I think is therefore, you know, one can't link it to the larger question of Indian English writing. But what it does is actually address some very, very key questions about today's India without actually talking about them at all. So you have a story about a village, about an irritating rooster, and some very livable, lovable, ordinary, understandable human beings. But as you think about what the story tells you, and that's where the satire comes across so effectively, it actually is about a whole sorts of other things. It's about free speech. It's about fake news. It's about the ways in which mobs are formed, the ways in which collective judgments are passed, the ways in which blame is placed. In today's world, we see all of this. He doesn't
it's
talk
kind of
about,
a microcosm. So,
he doesn't talk about television. He doesn't talk about screaming anchors. He doesn't talk about, you know, organized IT cells. But he's reduced them all to the space of a village. And I found it an astonishingly good book, and I really am so impressed with Unni, and I'm very glad that you and I have a chance to present his work to a larger audience on the internet today, because this is a book that deserves a large audience. And as I said, it's not a very lengthy read. So all of you who always complain that you're too busy to read novels, you can read this one.
But my question is the pertinent one, being that, you know, in a country that is changing, that India, the political satire as a democratic tool, you know, do we have enough room, or are we losing out these irritating roosters, or are they being annihilated, you know?
I'd love to hear what Unni thinks about this, but my own view is actually that satire may be the only response, because in non-fiction, people like me are writing anatomically about these things and criticizing the BJP by name or the Hindutva movement by name or whatever. In Unni's book, there is no party named. There is no religion attacked. There is absolutely, I mean, there is none of the political issues you have to deal with in non-fiction have had to be confronted head on. He has used satirical fiction to talk about things that are actually not talked about on the page. It's actually very, very, very clever. But tell me, I mean, I think you should ask.
Yeah, Unni, why did you write this book? Why did you, I mean, such a book at such a time?
Indian avasthayil, can you please translate my...
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
English. Okay. ഒന്ന് നമ്മൾ ഭയങ്കര ഇന്ത്യയുടെ ഒരു അവസ്ഥ ഭയങ്കര രസമാണ്. കാരണം ഒന്ന് ചാണകം കൊറോണയ്ക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കോവിഡിന് മരുന്നാണെന്ന് കരുതുന്ന ഒരു രാജ്യത്ത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇങ്ങനെ വളരെ പുരാണങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നുള്ള പല കഥകളും പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അതെല്ലാം സയന്റിഫിക് ആണെന്ന് വിശ്വസിക്കുന്ന, അത് കാണുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ചിരിക്കാൻ മാത്രമേ കഴിയുള്ളൂ. അത്തരം ഒരു ഇന്ത്യൻ അവസ്ഥയിലാണ് നമ്മൾ ജീവിക്കുന്നത്. നെഹ്റുവിനെ പോലെ വളരെ റാഷണൽ ആയിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ഒരു ആൾക്കാരുടെ ഒരു പാസ്റ്റ് നമുക്കുണ്ട്. നമ്മളുടെ ഒരു ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററി എങ്ങനെയാണ്. പക്ഷെ ഈ റാഷണൽ ആവുന്നത് മുഴുവനും മാറുകയും നമ്മൾ വളരെ നുണകൾ പറയുകയും ഗാന്ധിജി ആത്മഹത്യ ചെയ്തു എന്ന് പറയുകയൊക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു കാലത്ത് ജീവിക്കുമ്പോൾ ഇത് കണ്ടുകൊണ്ട് ചിരിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് മാത്രമേ നമുക്ക് ഇതിനോട് റിയാക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുള്ളൂ. കാരണം അത്രയേറെ അസഹിഷ്ണുക്കളായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരാൾക്കാരാണ് ഇന്ന് ഇന്ത്യ ഭരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ സമയത്ത് ഒരു റൈറ്റർ എന്നുള്ള നിലയ്ക്ക് എങ്ങനെ ഈ കാര്യങ്ങൾ പറയാം? കാരണം ഇത് പറയാനുള്ള എന്റെ മീഡിയം എന്നുള്ളത് എന്റെ കഥയോ നോവലോ ആണ്. അതിൽ
I'm interrupting here only because we have an audience which may
no, I'll translate it. I'll give
Sabin will translate.
That's me.
അപ്പം അതുകൊണ്ട് അതിനെ എനിക്ക് ഏറ്റവും നന്നായിട്ട് പറയാൻ പറ്റുന്ന എന്റെ മീഡിയം എന്നുള്ളത് ഈ പറയുന്ന നോവലായിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ അതില് ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ഏത് ഒരാൾക്കും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏത് ഗ്രാമത്തിലും സംഭവിക്കുന്ന ഒരു കാര്യമാണ്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ദേശീയത ഒരു വലിയൊരു പ്രശ്നമായിട്ട് മാറും. നമ്മുടെ തലയ്ക്ക് മേളിൽ ഒരു ഭാരമായി മാറുന്ന ഒരു കാലത്താണ് നമ്മൾ ജീവിക്കുന്നത്. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു കാലത്ത് ചില കൂവലുകൾ പല സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നുണ്ടാവും. അതാണ് ഈ നോവൽ എഴുതാനുള്ള എൻ്റെ ഒരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട സറ്റയർ ആണ് അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു രീതി എന്ന് എനിക്ക് തോന്നി.
Okay, what Unni is saying that in an India which is changing, where we've hit nationalism for a six, and we tend to believe in hearsays and superstitions. Unni says, as a novelist, his tools are novels and his stories. So he thinks satire is the best way, because in an India like this, where he can only laugh at what's happening around it. So we thought satire is the best way to approach. So let me go back to Dr. Tharoor at the moment. See, we've been talking about the irritating rooster, and he's being silenced and all that. And how do you look at the personal freedoms in many areas which are being curtailed at the moment?
Well, Sabin, let me say very frankly that we're here to talk about a work of fiction. We should probably keep it to that. But I would agree with the implicit notion that that indeed the space for intelligent, rational public discourse is shrinking, as Unni just explained. There's a heavy burden on the heads of all of us who are committed to free expression and free opinion. I might add that in the story, and I think the people in the audience are very interested, I'm sure, to know about the novel as a novel. In the story, essentially, the entire narrative is very simple. A rooster has been disturbing people at various important occasions. Somebody is having a memorial ceremony for former soldiers, and the rooster crows inappropriately, or somebody is singing the national anthem in a school, and the rooster disturbs it with his crowing, or all three religions in the village, Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, their leaders claim that their religious ceremonies are being interrupted. So the search for someone to blame starts very quickly. A culprit is assigned very quickly, and the person is persecuted with absolutely no evidence of guilt. You find that the way in which groupthink happens, that perpetrates injustice, bears absolutely no relation to the actual offense of the situation. And I have to say that the way in which the story is described through these interesting and believable characters, it questions a number of fundamental things about the way in which our society actually is functioning today. I think it's very much a novel of our times. It's ostensibly a timeless story which could have been set in any village, anywhere. It's not even particularly full of 21st century trappings. There are no mobile phones in it. There's no sort of, there are no internet connections in it. It's a very simple story, and yet the story, like if you look like George Orwell's Animal Farm, for example, the story can be read anywhere, anytime, and applied to its circumstances, but it was created in a particular political and geopolitical context. And I think that's the same of Unni. This story can be read 50 years from now.
Yeah.
But to read it without saying this is what was happening in 21st century India around 2020, under a particular regime and a particular pressure for conformity, that, I think, is what makes this book so amazingly interesting and relevant. I wanted to actually ask about 3 lines that Unni writes in the book. He says that all human beings have this is page 44, since you have the books, I mean, all human beings have the inborn ability to tell a tale. Some write it down, some just tell it. Those who write the tales are praised as novelists or short story writers. Those who tell them are counted as liars, because all tales are lies in the final analysis.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask Unni what he meant by writing that, because in many ways, this is a tale, a fictional tale, that tells very big truths, not lies. Why did he write those lines? And is there
Unni.
something about what he's trying to achieve that's embedded in those lines?
Unni, did you get it?
പറഞ്ഞാല്
താങ്കൾ
Unni,
എഴുതിയ 4 വാചക sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Page 44 Unni പറയുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ, all human beings have inborn ability to tell a tale. പറയുന്നില്ലേ, കള്ളം
എല്ലാം കള്ളമാണ്.
കഥകളെല്ലാം കള്ളമാണെന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു സ്ഥിതി. അതെന്തുകൊണ്ട് എഴുതി? വൈ?
അത് എനിക്ക് ഒരു ഫ്രഞ്ച് കവി ലമാർത്തിന്റെ ഒരു വളരെ പ്രശസ്തമായ ഒരു കവിത ലെമാർത്തിനോട് ചോദിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അത് ഉംബർട്ടോ എക്കോയുടെ ഒരു പുസ്തകത്തിൽ നിന്നാണ് എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായത്. ഈ കവിത നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എങ്ങനെ കിട്ടിയെന്ന് ചോദിക്കുമ്പോൾ അയാൾ പറയുന്നുണ്ട്, ഞാനൊരു സ്വപ്നത്തിൽ ഞാനൊരു മരങ്ങൾക്കിടയിലൂടെ നടക്കുമ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് വെളിപാട് പോലെ കിട്ടിയതാണ് ഈ കവിത. അപ്പോൾ തന്നെ ഞാൻ എഴുന്നേറ്റ് പറയുന്നു. പക്ഷെ ആളുകളെല്ലാം വിശ്വസിച്ചു. ലെമാർത്തിന്റെ മരണത്തിന് ശേഷമാണ് മനസ്സിലാവുന്നത് ഇതിനൊരു 100ഓളം വെട്ടിത്തിരുത്തിയ പതിപ്പുകൾ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ ഈ എഴുത്തുകാരെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ശരിക്കും ഒരു എന്താ പറയുക, നുണകൾ പറയുന്ന ജിപ്സികളാണ് ശരിക്കും. അപ്പൊ അവരെ ഒരു ഈ എഴുത്തുകാരെന്ന നാടോടിയെ നിങ്ങൾ വിശ്വസിക്കരുത്. അവർ സത്യവും നുണയും പറയും. പക്ഷെ ഒരു പോസ്റ്റ് ട്രൂത്ത് ഇന്ത്യയിൽ നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന സത്യം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഈ പറയുന്ന ഒരു കോടതി പറയുന്ന സത്യമല്ല. കോടതി അതൊരു ഫിക്ഷണൽ ട്രൂത്ത് ആണ് ശരിക്കും.
അതല്ലേ അപ്പൊ താങ്കൾ ഒരു കള്ളം പറഞ്ഞിട്ട്, ഒരു കഥ പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് ഒരു സത്യത്തെ ചൂണ്ടിക്കാണിക്കുകയല്ലേ ചെയ്യുന്നത്?
തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും.
Sabin, you can summarize that.
Yeah. So what Dr. asked him, why did he write the line where he says that all these storytellers are liars? So but what Unni says that storytellers are inherently liars, or they make up stories, but to point out a certain truth in the society. That is the gist of the conversation. Okay, let's move. Unni, you've always written about the village life. You've left the urban highways to go to the village pathways, cassava, yam orchards, and all that. So, but you have told me once that you don't believe that all the villages are innocent. Gramangal nishkalankamalla. Why is that? The village. Unni has once told me that a village is not innocent, and as we believe. So I'm asking him why. Why did he say that? We believe that in village life is rural life is innocent. We all love that. But Unni thinks otherwise. Why?
കേരളത്തിലെ ഒരു ഐമനം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ വില്ലേജിലാണ് ഞാൻ ജനിച്ചത്. ഐമനം വില്ലേജ് എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാം. അരുന്ധതി റോയുടെ ഗോഡ് ഓഫ് സ്മോൾ തിങ്സിലെ ഐമനം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ വില്ലേജിലാണ് ഞാൻ ജനിച്ചത്. അവിടെ ഇപ്പോഴും ഈ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം വളരെ ശക്തമായി നിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരു സ്ഥലമാണ്. മാത്രമല്ല അവിടെ ഈ കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം ഉണ്ട്, വളരെ അന്ധവിശ്വാസങ്ങളുണ്ട്. അപ്പം ഇത്തരം ഒരു കാസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം നിലനിൽക്കുന്ന, പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് അവിടെ കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റുകാരായി നിൽക്കുകയും അതേസമയം തന്നെ കാസ്റ്റിന്റെ ഈ പറയുന്ന സൂപ്രമസി ഉള്ളിൽ സൂക്ഷിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ആളുകളൊക്കെ തന്നെയാണ് അവിടെ ഉള്ളത്. അവിടെ ആളുകൾ ഇങ്ങനെ പീപ്പ് ചെയ്യുകയും ആളുകളെ കുറിച്ച് പരദൂഷണം പറയുകയും ഒക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. അതൊരു നഗരത്തിൽ പലപ്പോഴും അതില്ല. നഗരം കുറച്ചുകൂടി എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നത് പലപ്പോഴും സെക്യുലർ ആയിട്ടാണ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നിയിട്ടുള്ളത്. കാരണം നഗരത്തിൽ നിങ്ങൾ ഒരാളുടെ ജാതിയോ മതമോ നിങ്ങൾ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കില്ല. പക്ഷെ വില്ലേജുകൾ അങ്ങനെയല്ല. വില്ലേജുകൾ ഓരോ മനുഷ്യന്റെയും പേഴ്സണൽ ലൈഫിലേക്ക് പീപ്പ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കും. ആളുകൾ ഇങ്ങനെ ഒളിഞ്ഞു നോക്കിക്കൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കും. അത് സത്യമാണ്. അവിടെ കാസ്റ്റിന്റെ ഒരു ഹൈറാർക്കി ഉണ്ട്. അവിടെ ഈ പറയുന്ന മെയിൽ ഫീമെയിൽ ഹൈറാർക്കി ഉണ്ട്. അവിടുത്തെ ഡൊമസ്റ്റിക് വയലൻസുകൾ പുറത്തേക്ക് വരുന്നില്ല. അപ്പൊ ഒരിക്കലും എനിക്ക് തോന്നിയിട്ടില്ല ഗ്രാമങ്ങൾ അത്ര നിഷ്കളങ്കമായിട്ട് എനിക്ക് തോന്നിയിട്ടില്ല.
Okay, let me just translate it. What Unni says that in villages we have caste system. Everything is evident. Everyone knows about everyone else. There are no secrets. So Unni believes that in cities we are not like that. We are not that harmful to each other. But let me turn that question to Dr. Tharoor and ask you. You've lived in metros and lived in cities. You also written about your rural family back in Palakkad and all that. How do you look at urban life and village life and your stories?
It's interesting because this whole issue of whether villages are innocent or not actually was raised in the debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi. Gandhiji was one who idealized villages and who said that basically the future of India should lie in self-sufficient village republics. Ambedkar, on the other hand, said absolutely nothing doing. Villages are sinkholes of iniquity, casteism, discrimination, and oppression, and we should thus free and empower individuals and get away from the strictures of village life. So it seems to me Unni is closer to the Ambedkar idea here than the Gandhi idea. I think there's certainly a lot of truth in the concern that villages, particularly this whole notion of the timeless verities of village life, also implies the continuation of timeless, shall we say, injustices. And I think in many ways, the villages that Unni portrays, I've read some of his short stories and they all seem to be set in villages also. They have a fairly uncompromising view of the realities of village life. So I tend to agree with him myself.
Dr. Apter, let me ask you about fictionalizing facts. Unni has picked the facts from the village life and turned it into stories. So when you make, I know it's been years since you wrote fiction. I've been asking you when you're going to write your next novel, but then, well, you don't have enough room in your head, that's what you say. So, but then let me ask you, how do we balance between this facts and fiction world? Or if we take fact from the contemporary society and turn it into fiction, so how do you balance? Well,
all my fiction has been based on fact, which is perhaps arguably a flaw of my fiction, but it's certainly the way I've chosen to write. And in my three novels, the first one is actually, as you know, a conflation of the Mahabharata and the freedom struggle, and indeed the India after independence, the first 4 decades after independence. The second novel, Show Business, used cinema, popular cinema, Bollywood, as a metaphor for Indian society in all respects, and that included corruption, role of religion, the rise of godmen, all sorts of things feature in this story. The third one was not a satire, riot, but it was very much about the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and the riots that accompanied the Ramshila Pujans of the late 80s. So in every case, I have not chosen to write fiction that is completely independent of historical context, political relevance, and so on. But I have not done it the way Unni has done it, which is why I admire Unni's writing, because he has written about something without writing about it. Ostensibly, he writes about something else, and he does that. Now, as to your demand that I should go back to fiction, I always tell my publishers, every time I publish a book, I get a lot of despairing messages from fans saying, why not a novel? When are you going to go back to novel? My last novel was, as some of you never hesitate to remind me, 19 years ago, in 2001, I published Riot, and I have not tried fiction since, partly because I did begin to try, and then I got waylaid by the realities of my professional life. But I have told my publisher that after the Battle of Belonging, my book in November, which is my magnum opus on nationalism, that I really don't want to think about contemporary India, the contemporary world, or contemporary politics for a long time in my personal mind space, and I want to go back to fiction. And what is more, I think I may actually write something set in the past, so that I don't have to even deal with any of today's issues, as all my novels have dealt with.
I thought it could be a political thriller, since now we are in the thick of it.
Now, that kind of fiction also I don't want to get into, because these, what the French call roman à clé, where people are just looking for which character is meant to be which character and what is meant to be. That is also not particularly amusing. So I would much rather discuss something quite different, but go back to fiction. So you may have me in a couple of years coming up with a novel, if I'm able to find the time and the mental space to be able to inhabit a fictional world again.
Right. Unni, I want to ask you about the fear element in a writer. We've discussed this during the festival in Bangalore, when Unni was talking about, then someone asked you about the question. And Unni said that, yes, I'm afraid to write certain things. So let me ask you, what do you have to say about the fear factor as a novelist living in the society?
ഒരു ഫിയർ ഫാക്ടർ ഉണ്ട് എന്നുള്ള ഒരു റിയാലിറ്റിയാണ്. അപ്പൊ അത് നമ്മളുടെ ഡെമോക്രസിയുടെ സ്പേസ് ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് കുറഞ്ഞു വരികയാണ്. അപ്പൊ അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ഒരു സെൽഫ് സെൻസർഷിപ്പ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് എഴുത്തുകാർ ആ രീതി, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഗൗരി ലങ്കേഷും കൽബുർഗിയെ പോലുള്ള ആളുകൾ കൊല്ലപ്പെടുന്ന ഒരു ഇന്ത്യൻ അവസ്ഥയിൽ ഒരു സെൽഫ് സെൻസർഷിപ്പ് ഉണ്ട് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നത്. കാരണം നമുക്കൊന്നും തുറന്നെഴുതാൻ പറ്റാത്ത വിധത്തിൽ നമ്മളുടെ ഡെമോക്രസിയുടെ സ്പേസ് ഇല്ലാതായിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുക. നമ്മളൊരു അപ്രഖ്യാപിത അടിയന്തരാവസ്ഥയിൽ ജീവിക്കുമ്പോൾ അത് അത്തരം ഒരു ഫിയർ ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പം അതൊരു സത്യമാണ്. അത് ആ ഒരു സത്യം തന്നെ എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം അത് ഭയപ്പെടുത്തുന്നുണ്ട് ഇന്ത്യൻ അവസ്ഥ. അത്
yeah, well, Unni says that is a bit skeptical, is a bit of scared of so many other elements in society. So as a writer, he is not free 100% to write in a current political situation. Okay, let me go back to Dr. Tharoor and ask him about fiction and non-fiction. You've been writing non-fiction, which gives you more, I think, more freedom to address certain issues rather than in fiction, right? So, I mean,
undoubtedly, fiction gives you the opportunity, in fact, to create, if you like, situations that illustrate the points you want to make.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about non-fiction is that as somebody rather memorably put, non-fiction has to be true, but fiction has a bigger challenge. It has to be credible. That is because a lot of incredible things really happen in the real world. So if you report it accurately, you can write it in non-fiction. Whereas when you invent something, people say this is too far-fetched, we won't read it. Then you're losing out. But coming back to the specific question of fiction versus non-fiction, I think one of the interesting things about non-fiction is you are hemmed in by the facts and you are laying out an analysis. You are appealing, if you like, to the mind of the reader. Whereas with fiction, you're appealing to other parts of his or her anatomy. You're appealing to the heart, the soul, the gut. You are trying to evoke emotion, feeling, visceral reactions. It is sometimes, as in Unni's book, it also tangentially works the mind because you start thinking about what is the hidden meaning behind a particular episode. But otherwise, the broader issue, frankly, remains, as far as I'm concerned, that fiction and non-fiction target different things in the reader and seek to evoke different experiences and different reactions.
In that sense, what have you ever read of late creative non-fiction, which you remember? I mean, it's fiction and creative non-fiction. It does what fiction does to a reader, right? Creative non-fiction.
Well, I mean, there's been attempts. For example, the most famous, at least in English, is Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which was a novelistic recreation of an actual mass murder. And there have been similar books about the Manson murders and very many other things. I think that's a very interesting way of writing, and interesting certainly for the reader because it describes an event as if it was a novel. But it has the limitation that if it is going to be creative non-fiction, it has to be non-fiction first. And the creativity is limited by the adherence to facts that you have to follow. Whereas creative fiction has no such limitation. Let's say you write a book about Martanda Varma. I mean, you can't make him something he was not. But where there are gaps in knowledge, you invent a fictional character who interacts with Martanda Varma. You have the freedom to do that. Whereas if you're writing a non-fiction, you can't do that. So to my mind, creative non-fiction is more about the style in which non-fiction unravels itself than being about something that actually plays the role that fiction can play.
Okay. Before I move on to Unni, one more. Say, what do you think of historical non-fiction then? Which will the premise of history gives you more freedom to write fiction?
Well, yes and no. It depends on how far back you go. See, for example, there was a justified controversy, in my view, about Collins and Lapierre's Freedom at Midnight, which is also written like a novel. Now, they interviewed Mountbatten. And so if they said that Mountbatten was looking out of the window at his taxi on a gray day and thinking ABC, Yes, maybe Mountbatten told them that. But they didn't interview Nehru, they didn't interview the Nizam of Hyderabad for them to presume to describe what these people were feeling, thinking, and saying in private moments behind closed doors, to my mind, is a betrayal of the historian's duty and of the nonfiction imperative. So I have a problem. I really think there ought to be clearer lines between what is clearly nonfiction, where you stand by every word, you can footnote every assertion, you can source everything. All of that can be vetted on the grounds of accuracy. And fiction, whether creative or novelistically written or just boringly argued, whatever it may be, non-fiction has, it seems to me, that obligation for accuracy that fiction does not have. Fiction has to be true to itself. There is an integrity to the fictional evocation, the fictional imagination. That is very important. A novel must be faithful to itself, but it is not bound or tied down to a specific set of facts or a specific set of things that actually happened or a specific set of circumstances. It has to be credible in the sense that it has to engage the reader as a believable story that engages it. Or if it's completely science fiction or space fiction or whatever, then obviously believability is a function of how effectively you express your imagination and how much the reader is prepared to suspend their knowledge of the real world. But all of these things still, to my mind, require a clear separation between fiction and non-fiction, in my mind. And I'm not sure that just eliding the two is honest. You have to say it's either one or the other.
Let me go back to Unni, because Unni's fiction, I believe, is sort of magic realism, where the realism part is more magical than the magic. Because, when the moment we say magic realism, we only say magic, no realism. But in Unni's case, I find his stories are more, magic. The realism part is more magical than the magic. Unni എഴുതുന്ന കഥകൾ, you pick village stories to tell us, and how do you weave that into a magical world? With any influence of Latin American influence or the master's influence in your craft?
Latin American അല്ല, കാരണം എൻ്റെ അമ്മയുടെ അമ്മ നമ്മുടെയൊക്കെ നാട്ടില് ഈ മൈഗ്രെയിൻ കൊടിഞ്ഞി വിലക്കുക എന്ന് പറയും, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പശുവിന്റെ ചെവിയിൽ നിന്ന് ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഒരുപാട് അത്തരം മിത്തുകളോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത്തരം അനുഭവങ്ങളോ നമുക്കൊക്കെ നാട്ടിൻ പുറത്തുണ്ട്. ഈ നമ്മൾ ഈ പറയുന്ന മാജിക്കൽ റിയലിസം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന അത്തരം എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ അത് എന്റെ കഥകളിൽ സ്വാഭാവികമായി വരും, കാരണം അതെന്റെ വളരെ ഓർഗാനിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കാര്യമാണ്. അപ്പൊ അതൊരു മാജിക്കൽ റിയലിസം അല്ല, ഇറ്റ്സ് പാർട്ട് ഓഫ് മൈ ലൈഫ്.
Okay, what Unni says
sorry, go ahead. No. Translate first.
No, what Unni says that in Kerala, the society, in the village life, myth or it's part of our life. It is not magic realism. It's what we live,
Yeah, I know. I see that, but I don't think, in all fairness, that Unni is trying magical realism very much at all. In fact, if you look at the original Malayalam work of magical realism, which is O.V. Vijayan's Kasak and Itihasam, and you look at Unni's will come across as much more realistic, much more real. With, of course, there's a brilliant image at the end of the novel which may strike you as magical or going beyond realism. But in fact, I think it actually works very, very, very well on a different plane from magical realism per se. I do want to actually tease Unni that every one of his things that I have read, the novel and the stories I have read, all seem to involve a fowl. There's a short story about all the crows in the village. There's another short story about another rooster. So, Unni, what is your obsession with birds and and village birds at that? How do they occupy your imagination as a symbol of something larger?
മനുഷ്യരെ കുറിച്ച് എഴുതിയാൽ കേസ് വരും, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവർ കൊല്ലും. അപ്പൊ പിന്നെ
Unni says it's safer to write about birds and animals than human beings.
I think we should now open it up to the audience. That's a good answer.
Okay. One of the questions is, isn't satire a cowardly way to look at issues of religious intolerance, curbing freedom of expression, etc., from Jacinta Rao?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Isn't satire a cowardly way to look at issues of religious intolerance, curbing freedom of expression, etc.? Isn't satire a cowardly way out of the reality that...
Translate that for Unni, perhaps.
Unni, സറ്റയർ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമ്മൾ ഈ യാഥാർത്ഥ്യത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഒളിച്ചോടാനുള്ള ഒരു ഉപാധിയാണോ എന്നാണ് ചോദ്യം. ശരിക്ക് അഡ്രസ്
അങ്ങനെയല്ലല്ലോ. സറ്റയർ ഒരു എഴുത്തിന്റെ ഒരു സ്റ്റൈലാണ്, രീതിയാണല്ലോ. പിന്നെ വേറൊരു കാര്യം, ഒരു ലോകത്ത് ഫാസിസം സംഭവിക്കുമ്പോൾ യോസഫ് റോത്ത് നാട്ടിൽ സ്വന്തം രാജ്യത്തിൽ നിന്ന് മാറും. ഒരു ഭരണകൂടത്തിന് കീഴ്പ്പെടുന്നതിലും നല്ലത് അതിനോട് ഏറ്റവും ടാക്ട്ഫുൾ ആയിട്ട് അതിനെ എങ്ങനെ ഡീൽ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. അതാണ് ഒരു എഴുത്തുകാരൻ ചെയ്യേണ്ടത്. അല്ലാതെ പുന്നപ്പുറ വയലാറില് വാരിക്കുന്തവുമായിട്ട് പട്ടാളക്കാരുടെ മുമ്പിലോട്ട് ചെല്ലുന്ന പോലെ നിൽക്കുന്നതിനേക്കാൾ നല്ലത് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എങ്ങനെ അതിനോട് റിയാക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും, നിങ്ങളുടെ ഏത് രീതിയിൽ, ഏറ്റവും സ്ട്രാറ്റജിക്കലായിട്ട്. അപ്പൊ അതിന്റെ ഒരു രീതിയാണത് സറ്റയർ.
Satire is one of the methods of a writer uses, and Unni says that it's better not to surrender to the powers that be than to tactfully deal them. So it's one of the methods he uses. Okay, so see, next question is, do you think the essence of novels is lost in translation from the original one? How important is the language in narration? I think Dr. Tharoor, if you can answer that.
Yeah, no, I disagree completely with the question there, because I think that, rather with the assumption there, because in fact, my argument would be that translation is what makes great literature accessible to us from across cultures. In fact, okay, we can consider English to be an Indian language, but if we didn't have English translations of works in those Indian languages that are not native to us. If a Malayali cannot read Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay because he doesn't read Bengali, or can't read Munshi Premchand, or can't read Tagore, then it'll be a real challenge. But I can go beyond Indian languages. I remember as a child growing up in Bombay, visiting my parents' village in rural Palakkad in Kerala, and my cousins and uncles were reading Camus and Sartre in Malayalam translations. Yeah. So you actually had this entire world of literature and of human experience available to people who would not normally, even if these people had gone to school in Bombay, they would not necessarily have learned French or learned enough to read a French novel. Translation is the saving grace. So it is not about translation, but I'm a huge fan of translation. It is about the quality of translation. And one of the concerns that many of us had was that a lot of Indian writing was poorly translated for a very long time. I would make an exception, for example, for Kasak and Itihasam, because Vijayan translated it himself. Yeah. Similarly, there is some of M.T. Vasudevan's short stories that he either translated himself or he revised the translations. So those work. Otherwise, if you have a workman-like translation, and worse still, a literal-minded translation, which is weighed down by clunky language and explanations and so on, then people get put off translation and say, I'm not getting the flavor of the original there. But as translations have improved, certainly that complaint need no longer be expressed so much. I can assure you that there's some very, very fine translations out there which are accessible, which carry the same spirit and tone and informality. If the original is informal, they're also informal. Whereas very often you would find an informally written style being rendered in very textbook English. Yeah. So all of those things are now being overcome. And today, I would say that the quality of what is being published is very much better. And 80 to 90% of the translated books you can read, you will forget within a few pages that it's a translation. You'll just get caught up in it. And I find this particularly true of Malayalam writing. In fact, Benjamin's last novel won a translation award nationally, I think the crossword translation award. So good translations exist, and then they give you access to the world of the writer without the handicap of not knowing the writer's original language. So read Unni's book because it's well translated. Yeah,
Unni's diction includes a lot of essence of Malayali life and society. So and I think Unni is happy with the translation of his short stories and novel. I think we should hear it from Unni himself. Unni, what do you think of the translations?
We have a great tradition of translation, from 1940s and 1930s. We translated a capital in 1930s or 1940s. Devika's translation. Devika is a scholar and she's a feminist, and she translates a lot of works. And I think her translation is not word by word. It's as I call her translation as a transcreation. I am very happy to because her work is. I'm amazingly. I congratulate Devika because it's a wonderful work.
Yeah, Unni calls it transcreation.
That's actually a P. Lal invention, that word, because when he did the translation, the one-volume translation of the Mahabharata, he said it's not a translation, it's a transcreation. And that then has been, I think, credited in the Oxford English Dictionary as his invention. It's a good word because it basically means that there's a new writer's talent working. But Devika is a scholar, and the translation is very faithful to the original. It's not scholarly translation. It is perhaps accurate in terms of her scholarship, but it's written very much like a novelist, not like a scholar. And one or two, she's got a very interesting translator's note at the end of the book that explains her choice of certain language, such as the word in the title, which is not rooster but something else. I mean, that's very deliberate on her part. She has been challenging in her scholarship works of issues of patriarchy and sexual freedoms and various other issues. So that's also at the back of her mind, I think.
And she's expressed a lot of subtext in this book, and she's addressed that, and she's mindful of when she does that translation. One of the questions that's popped up is that, Dr. Tharoor, I mean, it's a asking for some tip. Is there could you share some guidance on non-fiction, how to avoid voice to be non-preachy, or I don't know. I mean,
but it depends on what you're trying to do. And Sabin, I'm sorry, this will Sabin and Unni, it'll be my last question because I'm late for a 6:45 event. But I just want to say that as far as the question of voice is concerned, it depends very much on what you're trying to do. There is some non-fiction that is meant to preach, that is meant to put across a point of view. There is some non-fiction that is overtly and explicitly political, and it's arguing a political case. Sometimes the politics may become polemical, where you are stridently taking one side. In some cases, you may choose to be objective and come across as objective, though very often those who claim to be objective are actually, in their choice of facts and quotes and so on, they are stacking the deck on one side of an argument. But everything depends on the objective of the writer. I would tell the questioner, don't feel obliged to be non-preachy or non-directive. If that is the objective of your book, for example, when I wrote Inglorious Empire, in India it's published as An Era of Darkness, about the British Empire in India, I very explicitly laid down in the preface itself that my objective was to challenge the versions about the British Empire that had become popular in the Western world in the last 10, 15 previous years, where they were sanitizing the empire as a good thing and claiming that it was wonderful, that it helped introduce India to globalization and reform the world and so on. And I said, I'm explicitly telling, I am going to oppose that, I'm going to give the corrective perspective. So I wasn't pretending to be objective. And sure, some historians feel I have been unfair, but that was always part of my objective.
Yeah.
But you cannot just take one side of the argument and claim to have been objective. In other words, you are responsible for the facts you choose to write your nonfiction on. Right? The facts must be accurate.
Yeah.
But you have no obligation to pick other facts that seem to challenge your argument or dilute it, because you may produce a less readable argument in the process. So you could just say, yeah, there are other facts available. I said that in my preface. Let others write them. Others have written them. The set of facts that I'm putting together serve the purpose of my argument. So that's it. And I if as a result, some people thought I was preaching, I have no objection. I'm proud of the preaching I did against the British Empire and its iniquities in India.
Shashi, before you go, there's a little request. Would you read a passage from the novel?
I actually did, Anil, a little earlier in the conversation.
I heard that, but that was very short, slightly longer one.
All right. I can do that. So this is when the a friend of the heroes, decides to hire a gang of criminals, essentially, to come with guns to shoot the rooster, the offending, irritating rooster. It's towards the end of the novel. Jalil waited for Papu Mapula, or Pappu Mapula, I'm not sure it's Papu or Papu, I think, Papu Mapula, on the veranda of a shop at the roadside junction. It was very dark. After half an hour, a one-eyed jeep came growling up. "Let's go," Jalil said. "Get in the back," Mapula said. One of the occupants of the back seat lifted a buttock and Jalil squeezed himself into the gap. They first went to the Devi temple. Jalil told them there was a clump of rubber trees behind it. Mapula grunted. Jalil had no clue how they were going to get a grip on the place. Everything looked the same in the dark. But Mapula grunted like he could see everything in the dark. Once he had marked each place with his grunts, he said they must go back to the rubber tree patch. One of the men switched on his headlamp, and its beam cut through the thickly wooded place, sharper than an arrow. He followed it. The other men took their positions. Before Papu Mapula went off after them, Jalil said to him, "Please save us." "He'll be down the moment he opens his beak, don't worry," he reassured Jalil. "You take courage, son." So you see, it's written very much as a novel. It's telling a story grippingly, interestingly, even entertainingly. But the lessons, the metaphors, the allusions, the hidden meanings give the novel a richness way beyond this particular story.
Before you go, just one question that pops up. If 2020 was a book, what sentence would you start it with? I thought it was a good one for the road.
I think if it were a book, it would be Remainder to begin with. But in other words, it would be put on the bins outside the publisher for us to pick up, 20 for 10 rupees or whatever in order to use as firewood. 2020 has not been a great year, but I suppose in many ways, Charles Dickens's Tale of Two Cities offers us the best opening line. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The year began in many ways as the best of times, an extraordinary period of innovation, ferment, transformation, and then it became the worst of times with COVID, the deaths, the pandemic, and frankly, the mismanagement of it in many places, including in our own country. At the end of the day, it will probably be in many ways a year that inaugurated significant change. Then at that time, you would write a different novel.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. Good luck, Unni, for the success of the book. Thank you, Anil, for having me. And thank you, Sabin, for your interesting questions. Do continue with Unni and the audience.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Namaskar.
Okay, Unni, there's a question here. What is Unni's next book? Your plans? Are you planning anything next?
I have no plan yet.
I mean, what is your writing process? Like, എങ്ങനെയാണ് എഴുത്തിന്റെ ഒരു പ്രക്രിയ?
I mean, ഞാൻ കണ്ടിന്യൂസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള റൈറ്റർ അല്ല, പക്ഷെ ഉള്ളിൽ ഞാൻ എപ്പോഴും എഴുതിക്കൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരാളാണ്. ഐ എം ഓൾവേസ് റൈറ്റിംഗ് ഇൻ മൈ മൈൻഡ്.
Unni, നമ്മുടെ ഈ the cock is a culprit. It is not just a system. It is not a system that is against, but every established norm, religion, power, male chauvinism, or gender norm. How far can a writer influence a society? ഒരു എഴുത്തുകാരന് എത്രത്തോളം ഒരു കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയെ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും?
I thought the writer cannot influence society because as I said, the readers and the writers are the minority, the community of a minority. How can we influence the major community? I think it's not. Sabin, നമുക്കറിയാം റൈറ്റേഴ്സ് എന്ന് എഴുത്തുകാരെന്ന് പറയുന്നതും റൈറ്റേഴ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയാണ്. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എങ്ങനെ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നില്ല അത് അങ്ങനെ ഒരു ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുമെന്ന് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നില്ല. കാരണം നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇരിക്കാൻ സമയമുള്ളപ്പോൾ മാത്രമേ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഒരു പുസ്തകം വായിക്കാൻ സമയം ഉണ്ടാവൂ. നിങ്ങളുടെ ലെഷർ ടൈം ഇല്ലാത്ത മെജോറിറ്റി ഉണ്ട്. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എങ്ങനെ അങ്ങനെ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നില്ല. ഒരു കറക്റ്റീവ് ഫോഴ്സ് ആയിട്ട് വേണമെങ്കിൽ ഇത്തരം കാര്യങ്ങൾ തിരിച്ചറിയുന്ന ഒരു കൂട്ടം ആൾക്കാരായിട്ട് എഴുത്തുകാർക്ക് മാറാൻ പറ്റും. ഒരു വലിയ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയെ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുമോ എന്നുള്ളത് എനിക്കറിയില്ല. അതൊരു revolution ഒക്കെ മാത്രമേ പറ്റൂ.
Unni believes that he doesn't believe that a writer can influence a society as it is. He believes only a revolution can probably change a society. But the writers have to keep writing, right, Unni?
Yeah.
എഴുതിക്കൊണ്ടേ ഇരിക്കണ്ടേ?
Yeah. അതൊരു ആ വോയിസ് എപ്പോഴും ഉണ്ടാവും. അതൊരു എതിർ ശബ്ദമായിരിക്കും.
ഒരു സമൂഹം സങ്കല്പിക്കാൻ പറ്റും.
ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു അതൊരു ആ റൈറ്റേഴ്സ് എപ്പോഴും സംസാരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കും. സ്റ്റാലിന്റെ പീരീഡിൽ മാക്സിം ഗോർക്കി ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ മാക്സിം ഗോർക്കി ഒരിക്കലും ഇസാക് ബാബേലിനെ കൊല്ലുന്ന സമയത്ത്, ആ സമയത്ത് ബാബേൽ മരിച്ചു, ഇസാക് ബാബേലിനെ സ്റ്റാലിൻ കൊന്നു കളഞ്ഞു. അങ്ങനെ ഒരുപാട് റൈറ്റേഴ്സിനെ സ്റ്റാലിൻ കൊന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പം റൈറ്റേഴ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് എപ്പോഴും ഈ പറയുന്ന ഈ എതിർ ശബ്ദങ്ങൾ പറയുന്നവരാണ്. അവര് മൈനോറിറ്റിയാണ്. അവരെ വായിക്കുന്നവരും മൈനോറിറ്റിയാണ്. അതൊന്ന് ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്തു.
Writers are always a part of the minority. That they keep questioning the system. You know, they're the other voice. They have to keep asking questions to the power, the system, or the elite, or whatever. So Unni, in that sense, Unni believes that, you know, he may not be able to influence a society, but he can't stop writing. You know, I mean, that is a process that he says, even if he's not writing, you know, physically, he's always writing in his heart. You know, but if you pick a character from the novel, which is your favorite character, when you create the characters in The Cock Is The Culprit, which is your favorite character in the process of making? Now, how do you create a character?
That Naniyamma.
Why is that?
അതിലൊരു മിസ്റ്ററി ഉണ്ട്. അത് ഭഗത് സിംഗിന്റെ ഭാര്യയുടെ പേരാണ് ദുർഗാദേവി. ഭഗത് സിംഗിന്റെ ഭാര്യയല്ല, ദുർഗാദേവിയാണ്.
This character calls him Durga Devi. He stands outside the house and calls Durga Devi. Yeah.
ഇങ്ങനത്തെ വളരെ
And you mentioned the mustache and all that. Yeah.
ഈ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള സൈലന്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരുപാട് സ്ത്രീകൾ ഉണ്ട്. ഇപ്പൊ എന്റെ ഗ്രാൻഡ് മദറും ഒക്കെ അങ്ങനെ ഭയങ്കര പവർഫുൾ ആണ് അത്തരം സ്ത്രീകൾ പലപ്പോഴും. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ നാണിയമ്മ ഇസ് മൈ ഫേവറേറ്റ് ക്യാരക്ടർ.
Yeah, Unni's favorite character in the novel is how old is she? 80.
I think 80.
Yeah, 80-year-old Naniyamma, who's, I mean, is very powerful. She lives alone. She can't hear. So Unni loves creating Naniyamma, you know, that character. And she's one of the, his favorite characters that he created in this book. And on the other side, how do you look at Chaku? ചാക്കു എന്നുള്ള കഥാപാത്രം
അത് നമ്മുടെ വളരെ ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ ചാക്കു എല്ലായിടത്തും ഉണ്ട്. നമ്മൾക്ക് നോക്കിയാൽ ചുറ്റിലും ചാക്കു ഉണ്ട്. യുദ്ധത്തെ ഇഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്ന, ഈ സോക്കോൾഡ് എന്താ പറയണ്ട, ഈ മാസ്കുലിനിറ്റി ഇഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്ന അത്തരം ആളുകൾ നമ്മുടെ ചുറ്റും ഉണ്ട്. നമ്മുടെ ചുറ്റും ഇപ്പോൾ ഉള്ളത് മുഴുവൻ അവരാണ്, ചാക്കുവാണ്.
Let me just a question വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. Khalil Gibran once said, out of the suffering. Sorry. The character Chaku, who is a villain in this novel, is always there around us in our society. We find so many Chakus around us. When you go through the book, you understand the character Chaku. So we recommend you read the novel and you get what a character Chaku is. And
Khalil
Gibran once said, out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. Is great suffering necessary for great characters or great story? അങ്ങനെ വലിയ യാതനകളിലൂടെ കടന്നു പോകുമ്പോഴാണോ വലിയ ക്യാരക്ടേഴ്സ് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്? അങ്ങനെ വേണോ?
ഒരു രണ്ട് രീതിയിലാവാം. ഒരു വ്യക്തിക്ക് അത്തരം യാതനകളിലൂടെ കടന്നു പോകാം, ഒരു രാജ്യത്തിലാവാം. പേഴ്സണലി ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ ഒരു മിഡിൽ ക്ലാസ് ലൈഫിൽ ഞാൻ അത്ര പേഴ്സണൽ സഫറിങ്സ് അല്ല ഞാൻ, പക്ഷെ എൻ്റെ ചുറ്റുമുള്ളവർ സഫർ ചെയ്യാണ്. ഒരു കോവിഡ് പീരീഡില് അഭയാർത്ഥികളായി നടന്നു പോകുന്ന ജോലിക്കാരെ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നുണ്ട്, കാലുകൾ പൊട്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു രാജ്യം മുഴുവൻ വേറെ തരത്തിൽ സഫർ ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ അത് തിരിച്ചറിയുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ആ സഫറിങ് എന്നുള്ളത് എൻ്റെ കൂടി ആകുമ്പോഴാണ് ഞാൻ എഴുതുന്നത്.
What when he says that a writer doesn't have to go through personal suffering, because when in the entire
In my
society,
case, in my case, in
yeah,
my case.
yeah. In his case, he doesn't believe that he has to go through personal suffering to create a story of suffering. He said unless he empathizes with the country on the people who are suffering around him, he can't write. That's I'm beyond that. That's when the true writer emerges. That's what Unni says. And I think that is the last question. We've come to the end of this session. We thank you for all of you for attending the session. And over to you, Anil.
Yeah. Well, there was a question I wanted to ask both of you. And Sabin, you've also written books. You've written a novel too. Is there a difference in the readership in Kerala? People who read in Malayalam and then people who read in English translation, do they react differently to the same book?
I think
I'm asking both of you this.
Unni,
I didn't hear. എന്താ പറഞ്ഞു?
മലയാളത്തിലെ വായനക്കാരുടെ പ്രത്യേകത എന്താണ്? അവർ ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് വായിക്കുന്നവരും മലയാളത്തിന്റെ ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷൻ വായിക്കുന്നവരും തമ്മിൽ വ്യത്യാസം ഉണ്ടോ?
കേരളത്തിൽ വലിയൊരു റീഡേഴ്സിന്റെ ഒരു ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഉണ്ട്. കാരണം എനിക്ക് തന്നെ അറിയാം, നമ്മളുടെ ഈ ഇംഗ്ലീഷും മലയാളവും വായിക്കുന്ന ആളുകളുണ്ട്. അപ്പം അതിന്റെ വ്യത്യാസമില്ല. കാരണം നമുക്കൊരു ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷൻ കൂടുതൽ വായിക്കുന്നവരുണ്ട്, നമ്മുടെ പുസ്തകം വായിക്കും. ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് റീഡേഴ്സ് ഒരുപാടുണ്ട്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ഒരു പുതിയ ജനറേഷനിൽ ഒരുപാട് പേര് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് വായിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്.
What Unni says, Anil, is that there are a large number of young readers who read in English. Those written in English and translated into English.
Yeah. Okay. Do they react differently? This is my question.
Oh.
Is the response different from?
Yeah, our response do they respond differently? Unni, that's the question. They read, but how do they respond?
Yeah.
ഒന്ന് പേഴ്സണലി ഞാൻ അത്തരം റെസ്പോൺസിന് കാതു കൊടുക്കാറില്ല എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. കാരണം ഞാനത് ഒന്ന് സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയയിൽ ആക്റ്റീവ് അല്ല, അതിലൂടെയൊക്കെയാണ് ഇത് വരുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ പേഴ്സണലി എൻ്റെ ഒരു കൺവിക്ഷൻ ആണ് എൻ്റെ വർക്ക്. അപ്പൊ അത് പിന്നെ ബാക്കി ഒരാൾ എന്ത് പറയുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിനെ കുറിച്ചിട്ട് ഞാനത് ശ്രദ്ധിക്കാറില്ല എന്നുള്ളതാണ് സത്യം. കാരണം എനിക്കറിയാം എൻ്റെ കുറവുകൾ. അത് അങ്ങനെ തന്നെ പറഞ്ഞോളൂ.
Anil, what Unni said that since he's not active on social media, he doesn't follow what the response is. One, and two, he wants to say this. He knows his limitations, so he's he's always aware of his limitations. He wants to say that. So.
Okay. Let me end by thanking you, Unni, very much. First of all, for doing this book, which we are all looking forward to reading. In fact, I've been getting responses. Someone said, I'm going out right now to buy the book.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And thank you, Sabin, for conducting this